Hello and welcome to India Boardroom. On the panel today, we'll be discussing the enormity of India's current job creation challenge. Our panelists are Manish Sabharwal, he's Vice Chairman, TeamLease Services Limited, Dhiraj Nayyar, Director, Economics and Policy, Vedanta, and Abhay Mishra, President and National Convener, PRAHAR. And I'm Joydeep Bhattacharya, Partner with Bain and Company. To get the discussion going, what I thought we could do is to start with taking stock of where we are and hearing our panel define what the problem is. Just to put some, facts out, and these are probably well known. India has the fifth largest GDP, but we rank, lower than 130 in terms of per capita income. We add anywhere between 10 to 12 million to the workforce every year. But if you look at, the job creation over the last couple of decades, it's been in the range of about 30 to 35 million jobs that have been added. So clearly, there is a big challenge ahead of us. And, with the view to the future, we are going to account for at least a quarter of the addition to the global workforce over the next 2 decades, right? So our addition to the workforce is going to be quite significant. So keeping some of that perspective in mind, what I thought I could get, the panel to do is to define what they see as a problem. Is it merely just job creation? Is it an issue of wages? Is it an issue of productivity? And Manish, maybe I could request you to get the ball rolling. We'll talk later about solutions and unlocks, but I would love to hear you and then Dhiraj and Abhay to kind of talk about how you see the problem.
I mean, I think the biggest question is what is the problem? Because a lot of people believe there is a jobs problem, and at least to my mind, that sends us down the wrong path, because unemployment has stayed between 4 and 9% since independence, and that's not a fudge, because you can't have multiple definitions of unemployment. You can have multiple definitions of underemployment. You can have multiple definitions of poverty. But once you start, fiddling around with definitions of unemployment, then you have nothing left. And so my case would be that the problem is not jobs. Everybody who wants a job has a job. They just don't have the wages they want or the wages that they need, because that is the only way we would be able to reconcile the sort of difference between our poverty rates and our unemployment rates. I think this is important for a few reasons, because if you think the problem is jobs, you will mandate a 3-day work week. You will take away people's shovels and give them spoons. You will throw money from helicopters, right? Because if the problem is bhuka nanga pyasa, then you don't really have to talk about other things. If the patient is in the ICU, then you don't tell the patient to lose weight or quit smoking. But if the patient is in the ICU for 50 years, you've got to step back and ask yourself, what is the challenge? So I would submit that the problem is not jobs, it is wages. And the only way to raise wages is improve the productivity of 5 things: the productivity of our regions, productivity of our cities, the productivity of our sectors, the productivity of our firms, and the productivity of our individuals. But we can go into solutions.
Dhiraj, would you concur with Manish or add other facets to the problem definition?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Manish, but the two statistics I generally look at in the context of this problem. One is that agriculture employs some 45% of the workforce and contributes 13 or 14% of GDP. And the second statistic I look at is that the formal sector, and I know Manish has slightly different view on this, but the formal sector employment has not really grown significantly over the last 30 years. I mean, it's improved a little bit, but not significantly. And I think these two really tell you that the problem is not so much unemployment, because the fact is that in India, people cannot afford to be unemployed. There is no social safety net, like in Europe or elsewhere. They can opt not to take a job and, live on dole. That's not an option. And there is all this underemployment in agriculture and in, the unorganized sector. So I think the problem definitely is underemployment. How you define it is a tough one, and there are multiple definitions. But I don't think the problem per se is unemployment. And so I agree with Manish, it's a wages problem. And those two, the fact that so many people are in agriculture producing GDP, and so few people are in the formal sector, which gives better wages. If nothing else, it gives better wages, better benefits, and people are not in that particular sector. So those to me are the two most telling facets of the problem, symptoms, if you may say so. And then we can go into more details later. But I think I would agree that the problem is really underemployment.
And Abhay, just to round it off, I mean, I read that you started a movement in terms of livelihoods resurrection, etc. A couple of years ago. I would love to hear from your vantage point. How are you seeing the problem as Dhiraj and Manish talked about? This is question of wages really, as opposed to jobs.
Yeah, well, I would partly agree with Manishi and Dhirajji that partly agree, but I'll not fully agree that jobs not the problem. Jobs is a very big problem. You know, rather I would like to say that the employability is a problem, right? Wherein comes the skills, education, and everything. I'll talk about it later. But when we talk about the unemployment, it has been a problem. It is a problem. Only thing is this, that certain numbers have been changing, every year. If I give you a data, uh, it is the government data that, I'll start from 2019. The unemployment rate was 5.27%, which was 0.06% decline from the previous year, that is 2018. In 2020, it was expected to be 7.1%, marginally increased, 1.84% from the previous year, that is 2019. If we talk about 2020-21, it is again expected to be, it was expected to be 9.8%, but that time it was the COVID and everything, and it sort of declined, and it was 8.1% in February 2022. And in March 2022, it further fell to 7.6%. So since I am one more perspective, I would like to give it to you, because I am working with the unorganized sector, mostly the factory workers, manual workers, street vendors. So they have been grossly impacted by the COVID, and otherwise also because of the employability issue. Here comes the education and skills. It has been there has been a lot of job losses, across the industries, especially so for these unorganized sector workers are concerned. So because we have been working, we as an NGO have been working with these people, and their income, their livelihoods have been grossly impacted. It was always impacted, but the COVID has played a significant role in the destruction. So that's how I look at it. When I talk about the employability, basically it's the employability crisis. Even the International Labour Organization also, in one of their reports, says, in context of India, that because of the automation also, there is a fear and there is a threat among these manual workers, because they see a lot of job reduction in the coming times. According to the ILA report, 51.8% of the business activities in India, which is significant number. And worst it is going to affect, are the workers who are basically low skilled jobs, who have small assembly tasks in the factories and doing all the odd jobs. So it will all be replaced by this automation. I'm not against the automation or digitization, but there has to be some kind of balance. So the problem of unemployment is there, still there, very much there. It may not be there in the urban sectors, which is also there. I can put some. I have some statistics which I'll of course share with you in the coming session today. So definitely, it's employment is a big problem, and India has been sort of struggling with it for decades. Only the numbers have been changing here and there.
Understood, Abhay. Clearly, and what I'm hearing all three of you say, that there's clearly an issue of wages for sure. There is also, Abhay, as you're saying, the question of employability. There is an unemployment issue as well that we should absolutely kind of consider. With that definition, and Dhiraj, I do agree that there are multiple ways that you can try and define underemployment, etc. But in the interest of taking this discussion forward, what I thought we could start by, if we understand the problem to be one of, let's say wages and productivity as a starting point, what could be some critical kind of unlocks to get things going? Manish, you said that this patient has been in the ICU for the last 50 years. There have been some attempts, there have been some recent attempts in terms of labor codes, etc. But, if you were to define what could be the 3 or 4 most critical unlocks, those could be regulatory, they could be related to infrastructure, infrastructure or skills deployment? I would love to hear you. I was fascinated by what you wrote a little while ago in terms of the regulatory cholesterol as you described it. But I would love to hear you, in terms of the unlocks, and then Abhay, Dhiraj, I'm going to come to you after that.
See, India doesn't have a shortage of land. You could give every Indian household half an acre and they would fit into Rajasthan and in Haryana. We don't have a shortage of capital. 50% of our FDI since 1947 came in the last 5 years. And obviously, we've seen the unicorn phenomena. So for the right opportunities, there is capital. We don't have a shortage of labor. As Dhiraj said, 40% of our labor force is Vela in some way or the other. So what the problem is really in how does this land, labor, capital combine? What economists call total factor productivity, but you could also just call it entrepreneurship or innovation, right? And how does land, labor, capital combine? Essentially today, our labor is handicapped without capital and our capital is handicapped without labor. And there are only three interventions possible: fiscal, monetary, and structural, right? Fiscal, if fiscal deficits could make countries rich, then no country would be poor, right? So I'm not sure fiscal deficit is or fiscal spending is. Anyway, we went into COVID with 70% public debt to GDP. We're exiting COVID with 90%. So I don't think there's that much room there. Monetary policy, I still haven't figured out whether it is a placebo or a painkiller or a steroid. It's surely not a solution to India's unemployment. Now, structurally, the solution is more formalization, more urbanization, more industrialization, more financialization, and more human capital. You can't sort of view unemployability without viewing the context of our jobs. I mean, there are no such thing as poor people, right? There are people in poor places. An electrician who moves from Patna to Bangalore gets 4 times more salary. A plumber who moves from Nigeria to the US gets 25 times more salary. The same guy, right? So very often, even if you're skilled, if you're in Patna or Balasore, what is your wage premium going to be? So I think looking at unemployability without looking at the productivity of firms, there's a 24 times difference between our largest and smallest manufacturing firms. Looking at the productivity of cities, I mean, if everybody in India lived in Bangalore, India's GDP would be more than China, right? Bangalore's per capita is now $11,500. So you look at regions. I live in Bangalore, Karnataka. My parents live in UP. Both states have the same GDP, but in Karnataka, we have 1/4 the number of people, right? So I would be careful with framing the employability or employment question without looking at formalization, which is how many companies are formal. Financialization, credit to GDP ratio, which is 50%. I think China's 300% is wrong, but we need to take our credit to GDP to 100%. Industrialization, the only way to help farmers is to have less farmers. And the two shock absorbers of India's labor market, farming and self-employment, need to be replaced by formal, non-farm wage employment. And obviously, human capital. I mean, schools, skills, and college is a complex question. But the notion that you can create skills and then jobs will show up, or jobs, I mean, it's a chicken and egg problem, right? The only way which comes first, jobs or skills? And I mean, the only way to solve a chicken and egg problem is to become vegetarian, right? Do something completely different. And so I think it's a little silly to say, well, if you do the skills, the jobs will show up. If you do the jobs, the skills. So I would just say a structural program to increase the number of cities with more than 1 million people. We only have 52. To increase our credit GDP ratio from 50 to 100, to increase our formal enterprises from 1 million to say 20 million, to increase our manufacturing employment from 11% to 18%, but reduce farm employment from 40 to 5%. And obviously, you implement NEP 2020, which is really, we don't need to go into the details of school, skills, and college, but NEP synthesizes all those challenges. So instead of a 15-year glide path for NEP, let's bring it down to a 5-year glide path.
So lots of points there to discuss, Manish, and I'll pick up something which I also heard, Dhiraj kind of, Dhiraj talked about the fact that formal jobs, etc., haven't gone up, and Manish has clearly stated that it's really formal, non-farm jobs that one needs to create. Manufacturing, for instance, has been portrayed as the manna for the last 2 decades. And Manish, I did hear you saying 11% go to 18%. It just hasn't happened. Dhiraj, I was reading interestingly, something that you wrote about taking some lessons from our cricketing success, for our manufacturing. I'd love to kind of hear you about that, because lots of intent out there, but not much seems to be moving. So whether as Manish talked about, more credit, more formalization of cities, of firms, etc. How do we actually break the knot, to create better jobs?
Yeah. So I think very often, the debate around jobs happens at the wrong point. So you're obsessed about jobs. Manish has gone, one step back, which is the right thing to do. I think you've got to go even one step further back, in the sense that ultimately, what is going to lead to the greater formalization, what is going to increase that employment, manufacturing employment from 11 to 18. And, fundamentally, if you look at the lessons of the other countries which had surplus labor in agriculture and which, managed the transition, it's happened really through large-scale manufacturing, large-scale labor-intensive manufacturing. So it isn't that India doesn't have manufacturing. The manufacturing which we've grown, which have become reasonably competitive, say automobiles or pharma, they're all quite capital intensive, knowledge intensive. We don't really have large textile firms, footwear, sports goods, the type of thing that China and the rest of East Asia grew on at the initial stage. So I think then there are several complex reasons for that. One of the reasons I still think, which is a problem in India, in the political economy, is that we romanticize the small. So, we always want to do something for MSMEs, and within MSMEs, MSMEs, micro, small, medium, most of those enterprises are micro. They're not even small and medium, right? So, and I think if you're talking about micro enterprises, they're not going to really deliver you those kind of quality, productive, high wage jobs. So I think we've got to stop romanticizing the small to start with. We need firms to grow to scale. And if you're talking about small and medium, then we at least need to talk about the German kind of definition of small and medium, not our micro definition. So I think scale is certainly one issue we've had over the years. Of course, I don't fundamentally think that capital or land acquisition may be a problem, but I still think the government has enough land. It owns enough land. It doesn't even have to acquire if it wants to do a reasonable amount of, large scale manufacturing. I think, it's just that we've got into this rut where both entrepreneurs and government and entrepreneurs as well, given the incentive structures they faced over the years, they prefer capital intensive or knowledge intensive investments. If you look at the startups, is there a single one in kind of manufacturing as we knew it 20 years ago, old style manufacturing, which will create jobs for those farm hands? So I think we have not moved the needle at all. Where we have manufacturing, it's not the kind which will generate mass employment. But I think, we had certain ideas on SEZs and, Arvind Panagria, who was my former boss at Niti Aayog, used to talk about these coastal economic zones, a bit like China, that you create large clusters for labor-intensive manufacturing. I think the window is still there. We may have it for another decade, but I don't think our political economy is oriented, and therefore our entrepreneurs are also not oriented towards creating that kind of large-scale manufacturing in textiles, toys, or labor-intensive thing. But I don't see it, frankly. If we don't do it, I see again a decade or two of struggle on jobs. You won't find any easy solutions.
No, agreed. And you mentioned textiles. It is actually one of the most labor productive industries, but for a myriad of reasons, it's just not been as competitive. Abhay, just again wanted to pull you in, and you did talk about what I'm hearing from Dhiraj and Manish is that formalization and in some senses you need competitive scale across non-farm sectors to be able to drive better jobs, better wages. Your reactions, views on this?
Yeah, certainly. Non-farm sector needs to be given an impetus, because what happened in the COVID times that we have witnessed, ourselves. Anybody who is having a non-farm employment, these guys were badly affected. Non-farm, even the migrant workers who went back to their native places, they were without the jobs, they were without the farms, and they were badly impacted. So that non-farm, businesses through industrialization is a critical aspect to the entire scenario, and we believe that it should be done. But now, like Manish said, that the industrialization is the key. Industrialization should be there because there is no shortage of land and capital and everything there. Now the question is, how do we do that? What has actually happened over the years? Either we create the new industries in the far-flung areas. This is one solution. This is one way of doing it. There is another way of doing is that the industries which are already existing there, could we develop the downstream industries out there? Government has not done anything, significant, wherein there is a huge untapped potential lying there to address the employment scenarios. Where the youth is there, labor is there, everything is there, industry is existing out there, but you are not developing the downstream industry. That is, I'm talking about the MSME sector out there, in the far-flung areas. Had it been there, there wouldn't have been any need for the laborers to migrate to Mumbai and everything. And during the COVID, when they were packed back to their homes, they were totally jobless and suffered a huge livelihood losses. So my take and my suggestion would be, on a very practical note, is this: that the industrialization should definitely be there, but the lowest hanging fruit would be the industries which are existing in the far-flung areas, like in the tribal areas or in the remote areas, which are already existing. Government should come forward, facilitate the downstream industry to flourish and develop out there, which can consume the local manpower and create millions and millions of employment out there.
I mean, I just wanted to come in here because, you can't take jobs to people. You have to take people to jobs. It's a dream that doesn't die. It's very hard to create clusters. We don't understand how clusters get created. Everybody's trying to create Silicon Valley. Everybody is, and everybody fails at it. And I would say that when you say the role of the government is not to set things on fire. It is to create the conditions for spontaneous combustion. We've seen the industrial policy movie before, and it was a horror movie, and it didn't really end well. And so my submission would be, it's not as much as what the government needs to do. It's also what it doesn't need to do. We have 67,000 compliances. We have 6,700 filings. We just put out a report which mapped out 26,410 ways to go to jail. And the star in that movie is the Factories Act, which has 700 provisions to go to jail. So it's not clear to me. So there is such an apartheid between service businesses, jail provisions, and manufacturing jail provisions in India that it just makes no sense for somebody to really, because in political imagination. So I would submit that let's talk about the sins of omission, what things that the government doesn't do. But the sins of commission, with particularly this regulatory cholesterol, has to go. You cannot have 26,410 ways to go to jail in our employer compliance code. And I think that, so I would say, let's not try and take jobs to people. We take people to jobs. We don't have a Chinese New Year in India on Chhat, Diwali, Eid or Christmas. I mean, the only place where you see that is Kerala, which is 9.5% Bihari now. Right, they send 9% to the Middle East, so they brought 9% from Bihar. But we need to really think about this imagination of taking jobs to Balasore or Kanpur, or the kids from Balasore and Kanpur to place where jobs are. And let's be careful about our expectations from government. The government, if it does primary education, if it does primary healthcare, if it does law and order, and it does a bit of infrastructure, we guys are smart enough. We will do the rest.
No, you're right. And Manish, this is about, you're saying, actually creating the conditions for, entrepreneurship, spontaneous combustion to happen, right? The other point that came to me is that, let's say, I was reading, it's not whether the government is risk averse or not. It seems to be that people and different stakeholders are equally risk averse. And I don't know, Dhiraj, whether, you talked about this, that some of the farm laws that were, taken to, implementation, etc., it seems that, and they could well have been, if not entirely, at least partly in the right direction. But there again, there was a lot of risk aversion, and frankly, not from the government side, right, but from other stakeholders. I love the fact that you talked about, omission and commission, and we don't want to spend a whole lot of time discussing about, what our government should do. But, I would love to kind of pick up, some elements around, this entire issue of maybe skill development, right? And I know, again, this is probably trying to feel the same elephant in different ways, but going back to employability, and Manish, I did hear you say that it's not a question of skills versus job, what comes first. But I know that this is one area that you've been spending a fair amount of, time on. And your thesis saying that employed learners really need to, outnumber, full-time learners. What, in some sense, I mean, and that's learning for what? I mean, do you see ultimately the demand happening in services? If manufacturing continues to be, the next big thing always around the corner, what kind of, how should we actually be thinking about, this entire learning and skill development?
No reasonable person will buy a plane ticket for 10 years from now, right? Because they know that everything will change. More importantly, any airline stupid enough to send you a ticket for 10 years will probably be dead in 10 years, right? But there's not 5 minutes in a skill development meeting before some well-meaning soul says, let's predict where jobs will be 10 or 15 years from now. And that's complete waste of time, right? Because nobody knows where jobs will be. I mean, very few people in the last 75 years would predict that 5 million Indians would be writing software code for the world in a country with a per capita income of $2,000. I mean, last year we exported more software than Saudi Arabia did oil, right? And that would be impossible to predict, either in 1947 or 1991 or even in 2001. So my submission is, in our employability, we need to, rather than predict, we need to make the system self-healing. And so there are 5 design principles: learning while earning, learning by doing, learning with qualification modularity, learning with flexible delivery, and learning with signaling value. At least that is what I have learned in the last 20 years. Learning while learning is important because we have too many poor people who, unlike everybody on this call, they couldn't choose their parents and their PIN code wisely. So they can't pay for their education themselves. Learning by doing because soft skills are not taught, they are caught. And soft skills is where the wage premium is moving. Everybody is developing the hard skills, right? Because of rising literacy. Learning with qualification modularity, 3-month certificate, 1-year diploma, 2-year advanced diploma, 3-year degree need to be multiple on-ramps, off-ramps, but social signaling value of education. Michael Spence got his Nobel Prize for that, and I recognize it, right? I mean, IIM Ahmedabad is a good place to be at, but it's a better place to be from, no? Or Stephens or whatever, 2 of you are there. So learning with signaling value, I mean, learning with signaling value is important, right? And an online classroom should be equal to an on-site classroom, should be equal to an on-job classroom, should be equal to an on-campus classroom. So I would submit that the way we should stop thinking about employability by saying that we will predict where jobs will be and then we will work backwards from that. Let's make our system self-healing. Apprenticeships are self-healing, right? Because they're demand-driven. Classrooms tend to be supply-driven based on the teacher you have and the curriculum you have. So I think there are design principles now for an economy of the 21st century, which changes much faster than an economy of the 20th century. And that can be used. And I think we're sort of, NEP captures a lot of that, but obviously there's other things that we need to do. I mean, we must recognize we can't teach people in 3 months or 3 years what they should have learned in 12 years. So one of the worst things about India is we only have 45% of our kids left in government schools. I think that we have to change if we want to fix employability, because only 5% of kids in Japan go to private school, only 15% of kids in the US go to private school. So if something should be at quality and free, it has to be government schools, and that cannot be only 45%. So you have to fix the school system, you have to make the skill system self-healing, and you have to expand the higher education system in ways that massify and vocationalize it. Obviously, IITs and IIMs are very important, but they're rounding errors in our total numbers.
No, absolutely agree. Dhiraj?
Yeah, I think just a couple of reactions. I don't think I can give you more insight than Manish on skills. But I mean, one thing I think it's human. We can all see jobs going in certain sectors, but we don't see where they're coming. So I think partly motivates us to try and speculate where they're coming. But I agree with Manish, it's not possible. Because, I mean, if any of us had that foresight, we wouldn't be sitting here. We would probably be sages of the highest kind. So I think, yes, we see jobs being this, but that's happened with every industrial revolution. It's not new. And each time, I don't think you could have predicted beforehand that this is where the jobs will come. So the jobs will come, but yes, I agree, soft skills, learning by doing, all of that is very important. The other very curious phenomenon related to jobs that I see is that whenever you have these government advertisements for class 4 jobs or class 3 jobs to secretarial or even lower, you have a huge number of people with BAs, MAs, PhDs, and all of that apply. Part of it is because the government job still is it's the ideal job for a lot of people because it encompasses security, benefits, all of that. But I think there's a slightly larger problem with skills. I don't know how you solve it easily, but I think the Indian against society prefers white collar jobs, and that's why this rush for any type of government employment, apart from the fact that you have benefits and so on. But a skilled electrician or a skilled plumber in Delhi or Mumbai or Bangalore would probably earn much more than a government PM, over his lifetime. But somehow the respectability, the societal stamp on doing a government job, a white collar job is higher. So I was wondering, and maybe the others have a view, if vocational education could be upgraded or given some equivalence with a university education. You go to skills university rather than a vocational program or a diploma. Can you get a degree there? Because I think again there's a certain society bias which also prevents people from going to manual skills, even though it'll give them much higher returns than one of those class 4 government jobs. So maybe even in terms of thinking about skills, the entire packaging as well, making it more appealing for people to go in there, and so that they have as much respectability and higher earning than in a lower level government job.
Got it. Abhay, reactions to that? I mean, given given your NGO works with a lot of kind of as you said, non-farm kind of workers in such sectors, any views on what Manish and Dhiraj are saying? Especially, let's say, Dhiraj just pointed around, giving the right kind of societal status to a number of different vocations.
Well, what Dhiraj said, that vocational education needs to be given a push. That's very important. But I want to put another perspective to it. It again connects with the employability crisis. This is again an objection that I have. With the formal higher education system in India, the kind of educational institutes which are mushrooming in every nook and corner of the country. You will not see even a single highway which is not full of management and BTech institutions, and they turning out lakhs and lakhs of students, MBA students and BTech students, every year. And when they appear for an interview, they are they are totally waste of money. What is happening? So my point is this: that some kind of regulation should be there on the education system. It needs to be reworked and reframed, and it should be replaced with the vocational things. Because I'm not against MBA or BTech, because doing a BTech or MBA from a third grade institute is worse than anything else. Because what happens there, the boy spends a couple of lakh rupees of their parents' hard-earned money. He spends 3-4 years out there. And when he passes out, his expectations are very high, and finally he gets a job what he would have got without doing that degree. Ultimately, he lands up an MBA from a third grade institute. Ultimately, lands up in doing a sales job and credit card selling kind of a thing, which he would have wanted also. So the point is that, so for the education is concerned, my point is this: that in order to address this employability crisis, it is very critical and important that the vocational education, some applied skills should be imparted to the candidates, students, so that at least they are employable. They save a lot of time on education, on the third class degrees, which are nothing more than the business houses. They are minting money. They are not the third class institutions on the face of it, because their buildings are very huge. Nice building, nice infrastructure, but ultimately the quality that they produce, the quality of education that they impart, is absolutely not at par with the established and reasonable institutes, raising their hopes and expectations, and again adding to the employability crisis. Ultimately, it is on the numbers of graduates. It may add to the literacy rate of India, but ultimately when it comes to the employability, it doesn't add any value to it. It's of no use. So my suggestion, rather my submission, would be that if we could somehow, put some kind of regulation on these, institutions wherein they are pushed to bring some vocational studies courses and get more focus on such, application-based, course curriculum, that would be nice, and that would somehow address the, the issue of employability. It's not that I agree with you, some of you, that it's not a question of jobs. Jobs are there, but in many circumstances in the urban areas, you don't find, right skilled people out there. I would want to share with you, some statistics which this what you call it QES, Quarterly Employment Survey of 2021. There are vacancies in many sectors, but the vacancies are unfilled. You know why? The reason is this, that these organizations, these firms are not able to find the right skilled manpower for themselves. Like, for example, manufacturing, 19.5% vacancies are unfilled, and they say they have been surveyed and they admit that they are not finding the right skilled people out there. In construction, 24.5% vacancies are unfilled. They are not finding the right skilled person out there. Jobs are there, but what the employability crisis? This is what the employability crisis, because they are not able to find out the right skilled people for the right job, for that job. Similarly, for trade, 24%, hospitality, XYZ%, and like this. So jobs are there. Employability is a big crisis, and here education, quality education, plays a very, very critical and important role. And my submission to the government, my urge to the government would be that, Skill India is an excellent concept, fine, very good, fine. But why can't it happen at the college level, education level?
I think Manish is arguing for even earlier, the school.
No, but can I disagree at 5 different levels with what Abhay said? I mean, the world has produced more graduates in the last 40 years than the 800 years before that, when college was invented in Bologna. 60% of taxi drivers in Korea now have a college degree. 31% of Walmart checkout clerks now have a college degree. 15% of high-end security guards. So I'm not sure why you put college on the pedestal that it is, or why do you even say that, why do they want college? Vocational education is usually for other people's children. It's not for our children. So because of the social signaling value. And secondly, why are you raining on these engineering or MBA colleges? They went from 5 lakhs to 18 lakhs capacity. They went back down to 11 lakhs because IT didn't expand. Now they're going up to 15 lakhs. So 30% of engineering colleges and MBA institutes in this country are either empty or in the process of being shut down. So I would be careful. India's IT industry has been created, its people supply chain is created on this elasticity of the 17 lakh engineers, which we went to. Then there was a slowdown between the global financial crisis and COVID. So it went down to 11 lakhs. Now it's gone back up to 15 lakhs because IT employment is going from 5 million to 10 million in the next 10 years because of the COVID digitization super cycle. So I would be a little less prescriptive. And what you're prescribing is MCI. The Medical Council of India tried to control quality by controlling quantity, and we only ended up with 50,000 doctors. AICT took a different view that let competition run wild. And, in engineering institutes like RV, BMS, many in Bangalore were not born adults. They were not born with good quality, but over the last 15 years, they have become the people supply chain for IBM, Wipro, and others. And the ones which are bad are shutting down. So I would be a little careful in the government's ability, which you're asking for, to decide what is good quality and who should live and who should die, and whether we should direct them to vocational training. It assumes a level of capacity, knowledge, and competence that I don't think we have seen either with AICT or with UGC or with MCI.
All right. Gentlemen, let me just try and bring this back in the last few minutes of this panel discussion. We've covered a lot of topics, but to just summarize, and then I'd love to get concluding views or actions from you. We started with defining, saying that this is really in this panel's view more a wages and to an extent an employability problem, not a jobs problem. We also discussed the fact that if you look at all the factors, land, labor, capital, all of that is available. It's a question of really finding that, getting that to work together to create the conditions, for more formal, non-farm jobs, etc., to be created, and you really have to let that, flow happen as opposed to direct it. We did talk about, then skills and employability. We talked about, Dhiraj, to your point about saying, let's not romanticize, small, we need scale, we need competitive industries. We do need more labor intensive industries as opposed to the capital and knowledge ones. Manish, your point around the regulatory cholesterol, which is in some senses clogging up whatever entrepreneurial, juice we may have in our veins. But given that, and I'm sure, the great thing is you guys do have different views. But if you were to then, how do, Manish, I'm still struggling to figure out, what therefore are the 2 or 3 key steps that, whether it's the government or is it individual firms or us as individuals, need to take, because how do we actually start getting that combination, together? So, just in concluding remarks, if you were to say, from each of you, on the 2 or 3 kind of important steps that either corporates or the government as stakeholder or us as individuals, as participants in, either the labor or the capital market, what that we need to do.
I think for me, and I'll be very short. I think ultimately, for me, it's about competition and creating a cost-competitive economy. There's unfortunately no shortcut around that. I mean, the government can make somebody live for 5 years, but eventually, as we found out in pre-1991, people would have to die if you're not competitive. So I think instead of creating more inefficiencies, more interventions, I would opt for the less intervention, more efficiency route. At least let the entrepreneurial class create, world-class industries, particularly in manufacturing on the one side. And I think even on the skills and, education side, rather than more regulation, because we've seen enough regulation. I mean, we've tried everything in terms of regulation. We haven't tried enough in terms of deregulation. So I think both in the education universe, let many flowers bloom, let there be competition. I think quality can come out of competition as well. It doesn't necessarily come out of regulation all the time. And as I said, even if in skills, if you've got more competition, people giving higher signaling value, creating better institutions, will give you degrees maybe, or certain other frameworks. Maybe in that sense, some kind of regulatory interventions, but not micro regulatory interventions. I think you got to just create a competitive economy, a cost competitive economy. I think services is reasonably good, but on manufacturing, definitely a lot of work to be done, as well as skills and education. I think again, competition is a force for the good. Government need not be ruled out of it. Let government schools also compete. There's no government schools or government vocational institutes. They can also be part of the competition. But ultimately, I think competition is what will deliver us quality and an ability to create a world-class economy. I think in this world, you can say deglobalization after COVID, after Russia. It's not going to deglobalize. Not going to go back to the way it was in the 1950s or 60s. We're going to live in a global world, and unless you're competitive globally, you're not going to create institutions or employment which will meet the aspirations of your people, because the aspirations of your people are going to be global.
Understood. So competition and is in some senses the disinfectant that we need to actually have. Got it. Abhay, thoughts from you, and then Manish, I'll let you have the last word. On the panel. Abhay, concluding remarks and suggested actions.
Well, I would like to share with you, some solutions. As I look at this problem and how do I see resolution to this issue. Since I have been interacting and I'm working with the micro enterprises mostly, MSME, according to me, is a very vast area, big area, which includes medium, small, and micro enterprises. So particularly, I would like to focus on the micro part of it. When I say micro part of it, I would want to focus on the industries, entrepreneur, a one-man show kind of enterprises, which are millions. If you look at the bottom of the pyramid, the micro, constitutes a major part of it. I'm talking about the enterprises which have a paid-up capital of 1 lakh rupees, 1.5 lakh rupees, and it starts operating, doing business in whatever environment we are, in whatever regulations, regulatory framework we are. It starts operating business, and it gets choked after a while. If he needs funding, he goes to a bank. No matter how much Mudra Yojana you run, I have no doubt many might have been benefited with this Mudra Yojana, but how many have been refused this facility? Nobody wants to talk about it. When you go to approach a bank, they ask for your financial credentials, collateral value that you can mortgage in order to procure a 10 lakh rupees of loan. Right? So my submission would be that this particular facility of loaning, and sort of facilitating that micro enterprise should be deregulated. It should be eased out So that a small enterprising, because a small enterprise has the capability of engaging at least 5 people. A startup, a small startup, educated by a house lady, an educated lady, who due to any reasons, even it could be a a MBA graduate or BTech, because of certain compulsions, she can't take up a regular job. What she wants to be an entrepreneur woman, start a small manufacturing unit of, let's say, garments or maybe pottery or whatever. When she approaches the bank, she is refused because her loan approval is based on the credibility, financial credentials she has to prove. If she had all such impressive financial credentials, then probably she wouldn't have been required to, go taking a loan from the bank. So my concluding remarks would be that if we want to address the unemployment situation in India, we will have to look at the unorganized sectors, micro enterprises, which constitutes a major part of it. If you look at it, even in the urban sector, one of the reports says that 98.05% of the total, estimated employment, they are employed in the form of employees only, right? And only 1.95% are the self-employed people. So my concluding remark would be that this 1.95% of the self-employed people, this number needs to go up, because self-employment is, according to me, is the best sustainable, workable solution to the unemployment problem in India, because it's a country of 130 crores.
Right.
Whatever Manish and Dhiraj have said, all fine, everything is fine, industrialization, this, that. But we need to take very, very small steps, baby steps. Micro industries can't be ignored. You can't ignore it. Now, just to come to think of it, unorganized sector, wherein it employs 90% of the people.
Got it.
Now come to think of their kids, their education, their aspirations. Everybody is tempted to attend a college, BTech. Father is accumulating wealth. Somehow, they are arranging for their education, and ultimately he ends up, doing a petty odd job. So that is the biggest story. Then the rural development is another key. Developing an industry.
Abhay, if I could request you to keep it brief. Yeah.
Sorry, I took a little longer than
so that's fine. If you just want to very quickly conclude your point on rural, but very briefly, and then we can move to Manish for his concluding remarks.
Yeah, rural is what I am saying, that rural development is again a key to the unemployment, because there, you should create some industries, or those industries which are already existing out there, you should try to create downstream industries out there in the far-flung areas, because that will create a lot of untapped potential. It has a lot of untapped potential, and a lot of enormous job opportunities can be created at the doorstep.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Manish,
My view is that Indian entrepreneurs are ready. What the context is, we need the government to do less so it can do more. We need the government to focus on human capital. We need them to focus on healthcare. We need them to focus on infrastructure and focus on law and order. Obviously, this ease of doing business rankings, our rankings were going up, but our daily life wasn't changing. So I think the ease of doing business, if we look at it from a pure employer perspective, the rationalizing, digitizing, and decriminalizing this 67,000 would be a one-time exercise, which could be fantastic in creating the spontaneous combustion. Finally, it is human capital. I mean, I would agree with you that it is a 21st century economy is built on human capital. As you said, we're 138th in per capita GDP, and we'll probably be third. We'll cross Japan and Germany in total GDP in a few years. But our daily lives, as COVID reminded us, is really influenced by per capita GDP. And so if the government raises, what is the strength of a country in the 21st century? Ramdhari Singh Dinkar is one of my favorite Hindi poets. He says, Shama Shobhati us bhujang ko jiske paas garal ho. Only snakes with venom can be kind, benevolent, and generous. And in the 21st century, inner strength is really human capital. So I would submit that NEP acceleration, but human capital is obviously linked to healthcare quite substantially. And so the government should only do four things. It should focus on law and order, it should focus on infrastructure, it should focus on education, and focus on healthcare. And we will use that very fertile habitat and create a lot of jobs and reduce farm employment and hopefully reduce self-employment, because most self-employment is self-exploitation.
Okay, great. No, so thank you all. I mean, a great set of prescriptions for what the government should do and what it should not. And I think the overwhelming view is to kind of in some senses enable conditions for both better wages, better skills, better jobs to be created, right? So it is again maybe something which is familiar to all of us, that maybe most of the solution is probably known or understood. It's really a question of just getting down and doing it. But thank you all, gentlemen, for your time. Thank you for the engaging discussion that we had. Thank you for the different views and perspectives that you brought to this panel discussion. And have a great day ahead. Thank you very much for tuning into India Boardroom. Stay tuned for more.